Okej, nu sitter jag här med en paneldeltagare som var med här i en jätteintressant diskussion tidigare under dagen. What's your name?
I'm Dougald Hine.
And you're from a cultural movement called Dark Mountain? Or yeah?
Yes.
Can you tell us something about it?
Yes, I'm a writer. A few years ago, myself and Paul Kingsnorth, who's another writer who had been the editor of The Ecologist magazine in the UK, crossed paths and realised that we had reached some similar feelings about our frustration with the environmental movement, our frustration with the world of literature and publishing that we were involved with as well. And it boiled down to a couple of things. The first was a feeling that the sustainability conversation, if it had ever been real, had stopped being real a long time ago, because it had come to mean sustaining our current way of living at all costs, as if that were either desirable or possible. None of that really made sense to us or to a lot of other people we knew who were deeply committed people, activists within the environmental movement, but that was where we seemed to have ended up. Another part of the problem, as we saw it, was that environmentalism had ended up reducing everything to a set of technical problems in need of solutions, and lost track of the deeper cultural roots of these problems. You know, how is it that we get into this mess? How is it that we find it so hard to get out of this mess? Those things are not straightforwardly explained by science. They have a lot to do with the stories that we tell ourselves as cultures and societies. They have a lot to do with the maps of reality, if you like.
Okay, so what would you do next, and what is your solution, so to speak, or your message?
Well, what we did next from that conversation 4 years ago was to say, let's create a home for the kind of writing that begins to ask and to delve into these questions, because there was nowhere that was publishing this kind of stuff. And so we wrote a manifesto, which was essentially putting up a flag to see whether there were other people who were arriving at similar thoughts and who were looking for a place to converge. And we got a response which was stronger than I think either of us had anticipated. We had thousands of people from all around the world, writers, artists, musicians, but also scientists, engineers, gardeners, all kinds of people who said in one way or another, we've been waiting for someone to say this. We've been waiting for someone to call the bluff of the things we feel we have to say in the movements we're part of, but which we no longer believe. And we've been waiting for someone to create a space within which we can come together and be honest. And part of that creating a space is a space where there isn't a rush to action or to answers, which is not to say that it's about giving up and withdrawing and never doing anything and having no hope that there are any actions which remain meaningful. But in order to kind of wash off some of the bullshit that we have ended up covering ourselves in as we've got further and further into pretending that one more march is going to solve things, or that somehow this time when we get the politicians around the table they're going to do what needs to be done rather than what's in the interests which they have been looking after every time they've got round the table at these negotiations. What's left when we stop pretending, when we just sit there in the dark for a while? Where does hope begin to come from? Where do we begin to tell new stories and find new ways of making sense of our situation? And so from that has grown, there's a series of books that we've published. There are writers from all over the world who've got involved in that. There's also a gathering, a festival that happens once a year in the UK where people are coming together. And a lot of what's coming out of this is, it's hard to measure. It's hard to put your finger on.
You're talking about telling stories and storytelling. Is your message easy to communicate, you think, to a lot of people?
In the first place, no, and I don't think that what we've set out to do with Dark Mountain was to create a mass movement or to communicate to as many people as possible. in a sense, it's more about creating a space for those who are ready to have a certain kind of conversation and seeing who turns up. And what's happened is that people have come from many different worlds. You know, a very diverse mixture of people have been drawn to these conversations. Now, I suspect that it is conversations like these, which is not to say the particular ones that we're hosting, out of which new ideas and new stories, which do end up travelling much further and reaching far more people, often come. That is, it's very often when you create a new kind of conversation amongst a relatively small group of people who are alive to it, that all kinds of unexpected things can arrive in that situation and then filter out in different forms that turn out to be very influential. I wouldn't claim that I can know whether that's going to happen as a result of Dark Mountain and what we're doing. All I can say is that there does seem to be a hunger for it. There are people, it matters to people who come in a way that is unusual, and that my reading of history and of, you know, how culture shapes history and shapes the world we live in is that it is these kinds of situations out of which new thinking, new ideas, new maps of reality come and spread.
Thank you very much.